Whoa, whoa, I just woke up 20 minutes ago, but the grind never stops, does it? No, it doesn't. Hey guys, my name is Miranda and welcome to my universe. Today I'm going to be talking about a book, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to any of you. But this book in particular, I actually want to start out with a warning before I even jump right into it. I have a list of trigger warnings, content warnings, however you want to call them, in the description below. I have never included content warnings before in any of my videos, just because the books that I read are usually on the milder side, but this book was incredibly graphic. I wanted to include those content warnings just so you aren't super blindsided, because there is a lot of things in this book. And now, without further ado, let's talk about Under the Dome by Stephen King. It's all about the fictional town of Chester's Mill, Maine, and one fine October day, something happens. The town is mysteriously secluded from the rest of the world by this invisible and indestructible dome. It cuts off basically everything, almost all their electricity, their air, gas, etc. The book starts right when the dome comes down onto the town, and then it continues on as the people live their lives dealing with this dome and the control of power, and we get to see all of the things that happen while under the dome. Now let's get into the pros and the cons, but of course we start with cons around here so we can end with the pros. One of the big cons, because I've already talked about the things in this book, I might as well kind of jump off of that. I do think that mostly everything that happens in this book was definitely for a purpose. Either it helped develop the plot, develop the characters, it helped prove a point, but there were certain things that happened and I couldn't help but think to myself, this seems pointless. I guess this is kind of a pro and a con, because most of the things that happened in here, even though they were violent and even though they were gory, they really helped with the fear factor almost. So I don't know. It is kind of hard for me to talk about these kinds of things and get my thoughts out, because a lot of sensitive things happen in this book. You can't really say that some of them are necessary while others aren't, because they all help with something. But I don't know, man. It was so graphic. Even if he didn't make them as graphic, I would have been better off, I feel like. That's just my opinion though. And then the second con was the ending. When I first started reading this book, I had very high expectations, mostly because half of the people who read this book love the ending and the other half hate the ending. And I was hoping that I would be in the group that really loved the ending, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I felt like the ending was the weakest part of the story for me. It really fell off at the end. It reminded me a lot of those horror movies that have such a great storyline and then they have like a twist ending and it completely ruins everything. I don't have really strong feelings about the ending. I just do think it definitely could have been improved, and I was expecting a lot more from Stephen King. Now let's move on to the pros, which there are definitely more of them than cons. First one I want to talk about, if you have read Stephen King before or heard me talk about him, it probably comes to no surprise, but the characters in this book are so incredible. When I started reading it, I was actually really worried because he includes a cast of characters in the beginning of his book, which he never usually does. So usually when I read stories that have a cast of characters, I get so confused with what's going on. I forget who is who. I feel like King did a great job with making sure everybody clearly knew what was going on, who was involved, who each character was. I hardly ever had to go to the cast of characters to refresh my memory. These characters, my goodness, I legitimately felt like I knew them and that I was living with them under this dome. I felt the pressure they felt. I felt all the emotions they felt. I loved some of these characters and then I hated some of these characters. Big Jim Rennie. There are all different kinds of characters in this book. We have the evil, we have the good, we have the right, the wrong, we have the chaotic evil, the chaotic good, we have the neutral characters. Stephen King definitely did not cut back when he made this book. He definitely threw a ton of characters in there and he was like, let's see what happens when they're under a dome. And he did an excellent job with all of them. Another pro for me was definitely the scare factor. I always worry whenever I pick up a horror book that it's not gonna scare me, but this one definitely did. I think it was mostly because this book is very realistic. Yes, the dome itself is not realistic, but everything that happens is definitely realistic. This book actually kind of reminds me of The Lord of the Flies, which is one of my favorite classic books in the world. So I think that's also why I really enjoyed this even more, was just because it did remind me of that, because we have all of these people in a survival situation and they have to decide what they want to do. They have to decide who to blame. Even though I feel like Stephen King could have cut back on everything that happened, I do not think it would have been as scary. And I appreciate the scare. I enjoy the scare. I think towards the end, this book got very, very scary. I would say probably the first half wasn't that bad, and then things intensified so much. I just thought it was super cool how Stephen King explored how far people will go to even live another day or even another hour. Because when you think about it, does it really matter in the end? These people fought for their lives. At least some of them did. And at the end, you see it either mattered or it didn't. And I think that that is also super powerful within itself, because it shows how much magnitude we have, even though we feel like we are super insignificant. I just thought it was very interesting that a horror book would explore such a dense and complex theme. Speaking of themes, I also really liked the us versus them, because initially you think that it's going to be us under the dome versus them outside the dome. But as you go on, you quickly realize that it's also us versus them inside the dome. And the control for power is so brutal in this book. You really get that who's right, who's wrong, who do I trust with the power? Do I trust the people I love even? And so that was crazy and super mind-boggling. I definitely was pleasantly surprised with that one as well. Also, this is kind of random, but this book, because it is so long, it's 1,000 pages. This only takes place in a week. Everything that happens in this book is over the course of 1 week under the dome. So the amount of things that changed and happened in this book also really proved how fast that our lives can change, and how fast we even can change, and how our morals can completely crumble if it depends on the situation we're in. So that was kind of crazy. I don't know, this book just really blew my mind in all aspects. Wow. Okay, now that I have gone over the pros and the cons, I'm actually going to go into my spoiler section. I know that the title says it's spoiler free. I'm sorry, I kind of lied, but I'm giving you a warning. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars just because the ending did really fall flat for me. Otherwise, this book is incredible. I actually highly recommend, if you are not sensitive to a bunch of graphic horror and violence, definitely check this book out. The ending is pretty subpar, but maybe if you read it, you would be one of those people that liked the ending. Who knows? All right, now on to spoilers. I'm gonna put this book down because I feel like it weighs 30 pounds. So, first things first, let's talk about Jim Rennie. Can we please? This guy, I hated him. Jim Rennie is the second selectman, so he basically is a part of their little government that's under the dome. He basically has all control over the police force, and so he uses them to manipulate people, and he uses them just the police in general frustrated me so much, because in a time of crisis, the police is who you need to keep you safe. And these policemen kept nobody safe. They basically hired a ton of teenagers because Jim was thinking to himself, well, we're under this dome, people are gonna start to riot, we're gonna need a larger force, let's just hire anybody we can. And literally, he hired some of the worst characters in this book because they were murderers, they were drug dealers. Oh my gosh, they did so many unspeakable things. They did so many things that I disagreed with so much. I thought it was so nerve-wracking watching these police officers take advantage of their power and their control. It was just so hard to read, and it made me appreciate the story even more though, because I literally was on the edge of my seat the entire time. But let's get back to Jim Rennie, okay? This guy, this super hardcore, devout Christian guy, does some of the worst things in this book. His solution to basically everything is murder, and I hated that so much because he is this guy, he says he's doing things for the right cause. He says, oh, God's on my side, but then he goes and kills people. I think that's also where like the exploration of like who do we blame was explored a lot with Jim, because that guy, I can't even form normal sentences about this man because I dislike him so much. I don't think I've ever hated a character more than I hate him. And it's not because he was underdeveloped, it's because he was so developed that I felt like I knew him, and every time he did something wrong, it's almost like I could guess his motives, and I was like, I know that you're not doing this for the right thing. Why are you saying you're doing it for the town when clearly you're just doing it for yourself, for power, for money? And it doesn't even matter in the end. You are literally under a dome, Jim. You cannot leave. Why are you trying to get more money? He actually was also the leader of a meth lab this entire time, even before the dome. He created this meth lab and he's made so much money off of it, and it's been all illegal and underground in the town of Chester's Mill. And actually, that kind of leads me to my next spoiler discussion I wanted to talk about, which is the fire. Stephen King has a way of destroying his towns that he writes about by either fire or water, because both of those are a symbolic baptism. So if he writes about a town that is so crazy, a ton of bad things happen to it, or it is overcome by some kind of evil, whether it is by people or a supernatural force, he tends to baptize it in fire or water to basically prove that this town is now cleansed once all of it is over. So in this book, he destroys everything by fire, and what do you know? It starts in the meth lab. First of all, the meth lab explodes, and it incinerates about 1,000 people within the first few minutes. And then the fire spreads, and because they have limited oxygen, it eats up almost all of their leftover oxygen, which is terrifying within itself. People have to start using all of the oxygen tanks that they have. People have to breathe out of their car tires. I felt as though I was suffocating with these people because the way Stephen King writes is like so beautiful, and it sucks you in, and I felt like I was going to die. I literally had trouble breathing when I was reading the parts about the characters who were having trouble breathing. This book is just, you know, slightly painful to read, so. And then the last thing I just wanted to talk about in this section was the ending itself, because I felt like it was the easy way out to have aliens be the source of everything. Yes, I know that Stephen King likes to explore the supernatural and the natural mingling, but I thought it was so cheesy. I know that the dome is more kind of a supernatural thing, so naturally we would have to have a supernatural ending. But I just thought this entire time we're following around these super crazy complex characters, and I thought there would be a super crazy complex ending as well. But instead we just kind of have these people, they beg to the aliens, aliens set them free. I even swear if Stephen King had nobody survive and that was how the book ended, I think it would have been more satisfying. Yes, it would have been horrible and horrific and so sad that there would be no survivors, but I think it would prove even more points than Aliens did. I don't know. I just think if you were going to drag your readers along for this long, you might as well give them an ending that is either horrific or at least satisfying, and I think the alien ending just wasn't satisfying for me at all. I don't know. But this book is crazy insane. If you have ever read this book, please comment down below. We can talk about it because I need people to talk with about this book. With that, those are my final thoughts about Under the Dome by Stephen King. Thank you guys so much for watching. I love you all. Please be safe, make good choices, and I will see you next time. Bye!